Morning, everyone. Welcome to the teaching video on matching law and choice making. My name is Eric McCoy. I'm a second-year master's degree student studying applied behavior analysis. I'm also a graduate research assistant in K-Lab working under the supervision of Dr. Ellie Kazemi. Additionally, I'm working at NASA as an intern through the Autonomy Research Center for STEAM. The topics of matching law we will be covering today are the background knowledge needed to understand matching law, the history of matching law, and the factors of a reinforcer affecting matching. So to start off understanding matching law, there are first some things we need to define from a behavioral perspective. Having the background knowledge of these three terms will make it much easier to understand matching law. These terms are reinforcers, choice, and preference. A reinforcer is a stimulus immediately following a behavior that increases the future frequency of that behavior. There are many examples of reinforcers. It's anything that increases behavior. So for example, if you're doing something well at your job and your boss offers you an opportunity for promotion and you continue to do well, that opportunity for promotion is serving as a reinforcer. Another example could be receiving some positive feedback on something you're doing well. You're working, completing your task properly, and your boss comes by and she's like, hey, you're doing really well. I like the way you're doing that. That feedback may serve as a reinforcer if you're continuing to do well in the future. Now, one thing we have to remember is that reinforcers don't always have to be, good things. They just have to be things that increase behavior. So one example of this I like to use is thinking about internet trolls. You know, Trolls are those people who get really controversial online and just want to start fights with people. You see, I use them as an example because to most of us, people being angry about something you're doing is not usually going to make you do it more. However, for someone who enjoys trolling on the internet, people getting angry at them tends to make them want to troll more. It's increasing their behavior. Therefore, for those individuals, it's serving as a reinforcer. So now we have a checkpoint question to check our understanding. Michael is the regional manager at Dunder Mifflin. He tells his employees that he'll be naming an employee of the month. His employees cheer and show a lot of excitement. And in the future, Michael continues to announce an employee of the month every month. Did the cheering and excitement serve as a reinforcer for naming employees of the month? A. No, because cheering and excitement are not tangible objects. B. Yes, because Michael's behavior increased in the future. C. Yes, because cheering is a positive experience. Or D. No, because cheering is not a reinforcer. If you chose yes, because Michael's behavior increased in the future, the answer B, then you're correct. C was a close answer, but we have to remember that something being a positive experience doesn't make it a reinforcer. Increasing behavior is the only way something can be a reinforcer. Now let's move on. So the second term that we have to talk about is choice. So choice, from a behavioral perspective, is selecting to engage in one behavior over another. And it's based on an individual's learning history of reinforcers that they've gained in the past for engaging in that behavior. So a simple example, let's say you want some ice cream and you go to Cold Stones because the ice cream is delicious and you go back. Because there's something else you could be doing, in this case, somewhere else you could have gone to get ice cream, or something else you could have went to buy altogether, the behavior of selecting to go to Cold Stones is a choice. And there are many choices. The ice cream that you select when you get to Cold Stones is also another choice. And all these things are based on your learning history. Your selection of which ice cream you get is based on your history of reinforcers with those ice cream flavors. The key here is that because there's always something else you could be doing, most behaviors can be conceptualized as choices. Um, Now that we have an understanding of choice, we can talk about preference. And what's important about preference from a behavioral perspective is that we can observe preference. The way that we observe preference is by comparing the proportion of responses allocated to one reinforcement alternative to another. So let's elaborate with an example. So let's say we have someone who goes to Cold Stones 3 times a week, and that person also goes to McDonald's for ice cream once a week. If you see here, there's a 3-to-1 ratio in favor of Cold Stones, which means we could say to some degree of evidence that that person has a preference for Cold Stone's ice cream over McDonald's because they go to Cold Stone's more often. Now let's talk about our checkpoint question. So Suzanne brings her own lunch to work 4 days out of the week. She eats out for lunch with her coworkers 2 days per week. From a behavioral perspective, what evidence do we have to justify saying Suzanne's preference is bringing her own lunch? A. She has engaged in the behavior of bringing her own lunch in the past. B. She eats out 2 days per week. C. She likes to bring her own lunch. Or D. She brings her own lunch more often than she eats out. If you chose D, you're correct. Because she's bringing her own lunch more often than she eats out, we have evidence to say that she prefers bringing her own lunch. Now, the other answers, some of them are good, but they don't provide enough information because you really need to have that comparison of one choice compared to the other choice. Now that we have some background knowledge, let's discuss the history of matching law. The matching law is the idea that behavior matches reinforcement. Essentially, that means that people will engage in behaviors based on reinforcers. In other words, they will make choices based on reinforcers. And this idea began with a study by Herrnstein in 1961 that formally conceptualized matching law during a study assessing a pigeon's preference for sources of reinforcement. So in this study, Herrnstein had some pigeons, and the pigeons could peck one of two response keys in a chamber, and each of these keys were on a variable interval schedule. A variable interval schedule just means that reinforcers are provided after a specific amount of time. So what he found was that a pigeon would allocate its pecking on the keys proportionally to the rate of reinforcement. And by rate of reinforcement, I just mean how often the food would come out from each key. So essentially, if one key provided food twice as often as the other key, then the pigeon would push that key twice as often. If one key provided food 3 times as often, the pigeon's responses would change to match the reinforcers that are being provided. So the pigeon would press that key 3 times as often if the food is coming out 3 times as often as the other key. Now, it may sound a little confusing, but essentially it all just goes back to the one statement that behavior matches reinforcement. So, when Herrnstein did this study, he graphed the data and he found nearly a perfect correlation. For every 1 unit increase in the rate of reinforcement, there was a 1 unit increase in responding. And this kind of brings us to our factors affecting matching. But before we move forward, we got to make sure that we get through our checkpoint question. So, why did the pigeon in Herrnstein's experiment peck one key more than the other? A. The pigeon had a preference for keys on its left side. B. The pigeon did not make good choices. C. The pigeon accessed reinforcers at a higher rate for one of the keys. Or D. The pigeon successfully avoided accessing reinforcers that it did not want. If you chose C, you're correct. The pigeon accessed reinforcers at a higher rate for one of the keys. And that is exactly why the pigeon pecked that key more often. And now we can really jump into our factors affecting matching, now that we've checked our understanding. So the first factor affecting matching that we're going to talk about is straight from Herrnstein's study, rate of reinforcement. And rate of reinforcement refers to how often a choice leads to favorable alternatives or leads to reinforcers. So think about your own behavior at the grocery store. Most of the time you go to the grocery store, you'll get the same types of foods. Now, one reason for that choice could be the rate of reinforcement for picking those items compared to other items is higher. If every time you buy those items, you're happy compared to some other time, some other alternative in which you haven't always been satisfied, you're more likely to continue to buy the items that have a better rate of reinforcement. Another example could be something simple in your life like petting your dog when you get home. You might pet your dog more often when you get home than you decide to ignore your dog because petting your dog has provided more reinforcers at a higher rate in the past than, ignoring this little guy. And another example of this could be checking your phone at work. If checking your phone at work accesses reinforcers more often than actually completing work, you're going to find yourself checking your phone more often than you're actually working. Well, let's go to our checkpoint. So, Brittany loves her job. She accesses more reinforcers at work than she does at home. John does not access many reinforcers at work. He accesses more reinforcers at home playing video games. Who is more likely to have higher attendance at work? A. Brittany, because going to work has a higher rate of reinforcer than not going to work. John, because going to work is a higher rate of reinforcer than not going to work. John, because he needs money to buy his video games. Or Brittany, because she is hardworking. If you chose A, Brittany, because going to work has a higher rate of reinforcement than not going to work, then you are correct. You see, if you chose D, Brittany, because she's hardworking, then you may be missing a really important fact here. So it doesn't matter whether or not Brittany is more hardworking than John. We don't actually know. But what we want to do is we want to think about their behavior when we talk about choice making. It's all about a person's history with reinforcers rather than being about personality traits. Let's talk about the next factor that affects matching. It's the quality of a reinforcer. And by quality of a reinforcer, I am referring to how good the reinforcer or, the reward is for doing something. Let's say you are a person who finds good conversation with coworkers reinforcing. And talking with coworkers in the break room has resulted in better quality conversations than talking in your normal meeting room. By matching law, You'd be more likely to continue going to the break room to talk to people because you're accessing reinforcers of a better quality. Another example could be a choice between going to Cold Stones or going to McDonald's for ice cream. Customers may go to Cold Stones more than McDonald's because in the past, they've learned that Cold Stones is a higher quality reinforcer. This particular scenario could be that the ice cream tastes better or has more flavors. Now, the next factor of a reinforcer affecting matching is the immediacy of a reinforcer. This is essentially how quick the reward is accessed for doing something. Essentially, people may favor getting access to reinforcers faster. Let's examine why customers may choose to go to a drive-through rather than going to a restaurant. One reason for engaging in this behavior could be because you get your food so much faster at a drive-through. There's more immediacy in that reinforcement. Another example could be as simple as you going to the grocery store that's closest to your house, just because you can get all of your groceries faster. It's the immediacy of the reinforcer. Now, examining the immediacy of the reinforcer could also explain why employees may steal from the cash register at work. If you're getting paid every 2 weeks for working, but getting money from the cash register is, you're accessing that reinforcer immediately, you could find yourself taking money from the cash register. Now, essentially, like I was saying before, it's choice making is not about personality. It's about history of reinforcers. So these contingencies are in place, increasing these problem behaviors because the contingency is in favor of the problem behavior. So in this case, because you're getting money faster in this scenario, rather than like from taking it from the register, rather than getting money from, waiting 2 weeks to get paid, the more favorable outcome is in favor of taking from the register. And I think it's also important to note here that these types of behaviors may be changed in companies by making access to reinforcers more quickly. So, in business, if you notice that problem behavior is occurring because there is a difference in the contingencies between the immediacy of the reinforcer of one behavior to another, then you can change behavior by changing those contingencies. All right, that was a lot. I think it's definitely a good time for a checkpoint question. So Ralph's and Vaughn's, two well-known grocery stores, okay? They both sell avocados. If, in your experience, the avocados at Ralph's have always been fresh, while the avocados at Vaughn's have always been old and squishy, where are you more likely to purchase your avocados in the future? A. Vaughn's, because of the immediacy of the reinforcer. B. Ralph's, because of the immediacy of the reinforcer. C. Vaughn's, because of the quality of the reinforcer. Or D. Ralph's, because of the quality of the reinforcer. If you chose D. Ralph's, because of the quality of the reinforcer, then good job. It's Ralph's. You see that quality of the reinforcer is in effect here because old squishy avocados are probably not too reinforcing. You're likely not going to go to Vaughn's specifically to get your avocados old and squishy. If you want avocados, you're more likely to go to Ralph's because if the avocados are reinforcers, then Ralph's is offering the reinforcers at a higher quality. The last factor of a reinforcer affecting choice making in matching law that we are going to be talking about is response effort. Response effort is the amount of effort required to access a reinforcer. And for a response effort, the less effortful something has been to get in the past, the more likely you will engage in behavior to get that thing again. Or in other words, when choosing between two reinforcer alternative, if all else is equal, you'll do whatever is easier. So, for example, let's say you work at a restaurant. You've got loads of dishes to do, and you can either do them by hand or you can toss them in the dishwasher. If throwing the dishes in the dishwasher has been easier or less effortful for you in the past, you're more likely to do that again. Another example could be having work that needs to get done within a group setting. One thing you might see within group projects is one person do their portion poorly with minimal effort, and the other group members kind of step up to fix it and bring it up to the standard. So, one explanation of this could be that the choice of doing things lazily in the past for that individual has resulted in the same quality and immediacy of a reinforcer, but they've been able to access those reinforcers with less response effort because essentially other people are doing the work for them. So we talked about a lot of information, but I do want to summarize some final take-home points that you should remember. The four factors of a reinforcer that affect matching are the rate of a reinforcer, the quality of a reinforcer, the immediacy of a reinforcer. And just a reminder, that's how fast the reinforcer is accessed after engaging in behavior, and response effort, how effortful it is to obtain that reinforcer. And some other take home points we should definitely remember. All factors of a reinforcer are in effect simultaneously with any choice being made. It would be very unusual to see only one factor of a reinforcer at a time because they all do play a role. We have to recognize that its individual differences determine which of the dimensions of a reinforcer is most valued. And that is also based on learning history. Choice making is all about a person's history. And I think one of the most important things that we should take away here is that by manipulating the factors of a reinforcer that are most valuable to individuals, you can change individuals' behavior. Thank you all for listening to this presentation. I hope you all learned something.